welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media Warren Frey, and with me today I have.
Ben Almond with SNC Lavalin.
And you're with us today because previously I talked to Derek Chubb of SNC Lavalin about working with Indigenous communities, and he talked sort of like the high level strategy and policy side of things. And today I want to talk to you about the engineering side of things because a lot of these are remote communities, and it's a challenge. It's a definite challenge to get out to these communities and sort of provide the infrastructure to get there, and then build infrastructure while you're there. So maybe you could speak to some of those challenges.
Yeah, certainly. If you think about the landscape of Canada, we are as big as the lower 48 in the United States with less people than California. And many of the folks across Canada are living in places that are disconnected from our cityscape that you and I probably see every day. And that creates a challenge both in terms of connectivity, city services, community services. Not to mention access to opportunities from an employment perspective and the backdrop of executing on key infrastructure work. It all flows together. So what we've seen over 40 years of working with Indigenous communities across the country is creating some strong relationships in the industry, combined with that local knowledge, the unique skills, cultural intelligence, and environmental stewardship allows us to bring solutions to communities that are otherwise underserved or disconnected from much of what we see in Canada.
And just in terms of what you do, technically speaking, like in terms of getting stuff out to remote areas, what do you have to do that you wouldn't say in a city? Like, obviously, it's a lot easier to drive. Well, in some ways, it's a lot easier to drive a bunch of equipment to a site. Not so much when it's, it's Baffin Island or somewhere.
Yeah, certainly, the logistics side of working with remote communities brings an entire skill set into play that is otherwise, probably taken for granted. Getting access from a materials perspective can be difficult. It relies a bit more on leveraging that, again, that local knowledge and capacity, whereas there are opportunities to use, locally available material combined with locally available labor and skill sets, knit together with some of the pieces that need to be brought from elsewhere in Canada or elsewhere in the world to create that level of success. So, in order to access some of these communities, you are disconnected from road networks, rail networks, and in many ways disconnected even technologically. So, bringing people into the community to work with local leadership can be, the place that you start, and that includes accessing their natural networks that have been built up over time for supplying some of the basics that we don't have to think about in places like Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver.
And you've been a big advocate for equity, diversity, and inclusion. And how does that tie? I mean, other than what you've already said, how does that tie into working in remote areas and working in not just remote areas, but just generally with Indigenous people?
Yeah, Warren, that's a great question. I firmly believe that everyone deserves access to, the services that are basic needs, the opportunities that are available in society today. And that starts with, things like clean drinking water. And it saddens me to consider that there are many people here in Canada that struggle to access some of the things that many of us that live in cities take for granted, like water, like access to power and other things that make life easier in the north. Now you can choose based on your cultural background how much or how little you use that, but it should be a choice, not something that is foisted upon a community based on its location. And the level of support and opportunity should be the same across the country. And when we think about our engagement with Indigenous communities, that being inclusive is a big part of that, right? So helping create more opportunity to build skills and capacity for communities to continue to grow on their own, while leaving behind some positive landscape with respect to infrastructure, we think is really important in how we engage.
And how does training work into this? Because I know that's something it's become more important. Well, it's we have a labor crisis to begin with, so the more people we can get working in construction, the better. How does that work into when you have a project coming up in a, like, say, a remote area? Do you train people locally?
Yeah, that's a huge part of that relationship is talking with the communities and making sure we understand what their desired outcomes are from said project. And there's labor, talent, people is a resource that is going to be a significant challenge going forward. And in many of these communities that are maybe more remote than others, building skill sets that are portable, that start with an infrastructure type project and last, when we're not as active in the area, is a pretty important outcome for some of those communities. So, as we speak with our partners, making sure that we understand what's important to them. And part of that could be a leave behind of skill sets. So we have examples in British Columbia where we worked with the North Vancouver Island Aboriginal Training Society and help develop skill sets and create jobs on John Hart Generating Station out here in BC, where folks went to work and continue to work after the project's been put into operation. And I think that's one of the things we're proud of is not only the infrastructure, but hopefully leaving a legacy of opportunity and skills in places where people are interested in that.
And one of the things Derek talked to me about was trying to design, like, from the word go, not just adapting a project to what the community needs after the fact, but or during the fact, but while you're designing it, making it from Indigenous principles first. So, have you had experience doing that? And if so, how do you integrate that into the building of a project?
Yeah, I mean, this begins right at the ideation phase of any project, right? The taking the time to listen, show respect to that community, understand the history and where they are coming from, respect being the key word here, and being able to work with them on, what are the key things that come out of this? Not just the infrastructure leave behind, but respect for the culture, their perspectives, what's important to this community, to this group of people, so that we can knit that into how the project becomes designed, placed, executed. That level of respect has to start with the first engagement and carry through, where you're deciding to put things, if it's hard infrastructure, how you intend to execute on construction and operation and ongoing maintenance. I mean, all of that has to take into account cultural sensitivities, the nature of the community and their history, and what's important to them in the big picture. So I think it's all about engagement and respect and being willing to listen and not enter with preconceived notions of what's best for that community, but be willing to take in, their thoughts, ideas, and what's important to them.
And I was recently at the CCPPP P3 conference, and Michael Fox, who was in charge of the Indigenous E3 initiative, he was talking about how there's much more of an ownership stake being taken in by various communities. So, have you encountered that when you're working, that you're less doing this as a job and more doing it with partners? Although you could argue you're doing that with partners to begin with.
Yeah, I would say we are in multiple places seeing a much stronger, and I'll use the word ownership maybe in a different sense, a much stronger ownership over the years of folks from the community standing forward and saying, we want to be a part of this. Here's what we feel like we need. And, we want to connect with like-minded portions of industry to help not only our community, but maybe the communities that surround us, or we're connected to. And those places are a great place for us to learn about those that we're doing business with, take in, what's their values and the things that are important to them. And when we find that alignment, looking at those relationships as being mutually beneficial, good for us in terms of our ability to fulfill our purpose of engineering a better future for our planet and its people, and good for the communities in terms of being able to access some talent, resources, along with hopefully a good cultural fit in the relationship. Being willing to listen and work together towards a mutual end.
Okay, thanks for joining us today, Ben.
Oh, thanks for having me, Warren.